Hello everyone. So I'm going to do a video, might end up being a series of videos. I'm not sure how long it's going to take, to be honest, but it's going to be a little bit of an exploration into the IAM, so Identity and Access Management side of AWS. So if you see my first couple of videos, it's really about sort of getting started, using DynamoDB and an API gateway and all that, and also setting up a sample mobile phone app using the mobile toolkit, mobile hub. I think pretty early on it makes sense in Amazon Web Services to sort of get quite comfortable with the whole identity and access management side. And to be honest with you, it's not the most accessible thing in the world. It can be a bit fiddly, especially when it comes to the policies and all that kind of stuff. So that's the little introduction out of the way. Hopefully, if there are any sort of things you want me to explore more, just let me know. I'll make subsequent videos, and we'll just kind of see how this goes. So, let's start from the basics. So I'm in my AWS console over here. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to have my root account running in the left-hand side of the screen, and then I'm going to create different users, or probably just one other user, and I'm going to sign in as that user in a different browser on the other side of the screen. And we're going to basically play around with different permissions and see exactly what the effect is in the other accounts. So when you actually sign up for an Amazon account, you basically start off with what's called a root account. That root account is obviously an administrator account, so it can add users, remove users. It has full administrator privileges on all of the services that you have here on the screen here. Amazon recommend that you don't actually operate as your root account on a daily basis at all, and that you actually use your root account to set up other users that have sort of more targeted permissions, and you actually do everything using those other users. And that's even if it's just you owning the account, and you're a developer developing an iPhone app or whatever. They recommend you don't use the root account for everything. Okay, so you can see, that's my name up here. I'm logged in as my root account. So the first thing I want to do is basically to show you how to create a new user. Right, that's basically the first step. Right, so just click on Identity and Access Management. And so down the left-hand side here, I'm hopefully going to cover in the first video generally what these categories, these top four categories, really mean. These are the sort of four principal entities that really kind of, let's say, glue the whole IAM system together. Obviously, we come down to identity providers. We'll get to that probably in a different video. But I want to talk about all these four in particular. Okay, so obviously probably the easiest one to understand is users. So I mentioned the root user doesn't come under the list of users in your account, right? So the users are ones that you've created as the root account, right? So first of all, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to enter a username. So I'm going to enter a username. I can create more than one. I only need one for the time being, so I'm just going to do that. So that's it. You've created the user. So you can download credentials, which are basically some access keys for sort of I'm going to delete this account, by the way, so don't get too excited. But this just to give you an idea, when you generate a new user, you will be given an access key ID and a secret access key. This is a bit like a sort of a public and private key, and this is used mainly for sort of signing API requests. So that's more of a sort of let's say an API and application level access. And we're not going to get into that today. But if you wanted to, you would download the secret access key down at the bottom here, and then you can use that secret access key in your kind of application code to actually sign sort of automated requests to Amazon and authenticate yourself like that. So that's that. You are supposed to keep these extremely secret and basically download them, and then and then you won't see them ever again in the Amazon console. So that's that. So close that, and and you say, so you haven't downloaded the security credentials. This is the last time these credentials will ever be available for download. So from this point onwards, AWS will not keep a track. You won't see them anywhere, because this is a public key that you own, and the idea is that nobody else should ever be able to get their hands on it. Okay, so yeah, close. Okay, so we've created our user, Billy Bob, and so let's set a password for Billy Bob. So we just click it here. There are various different tabs that we can sort of drill down for that user. Start with the security credentials. So we mentioned access keys already. You can create them at any time. You can recreate them. You can. What I'm going to look down here. By the way, I want to sort of quickly mention. I'll explore this more in a separate video. But you can also do MFA, so multi-factor authentication. So you can actually set this user so that they have to use, a multi-factor authentication. They can't just basically use their username and password. They have to provide another auxiliary sort of confirmation of who they are. So I'm just going to sort of quickly go on manage password. So assign a custom password, and I'm going to put a password in there, right, and then apply. So now I've set a password for Billy Bob, and if I go over here now to my other browser, I can actually log in as Billy Bob for the first time, right? So and return user. My password is now. Notice one thing. I've actually made a mistake already there. So so if you're not logging in as a root account, if you're logging in as a sort of let's say a child account that's been created by the root account, you actually need to use a different screen for logging in, right? So if I just go back to the main IAM homepage, so what we do here is, for the users that we nominate, we're actually going to send a special link with our account number in it, right? So rather than going to just Amazon Web Services homepage, we have a special link that we have to share with our users, right? And so you see the account is there. This is my account number. So the username is Billy Bob, and the password is this. So now I'm logged in as Billy Bob. Now, really important point is that by default, so when you create a new user in AWS, that user has no privileges, no permissions to do anything, right? So if I go to DynamoDB, right, which is what we saw in the first video, what we're going to see is basically that I can't do anything. So remember, we created some DynamoDB tables in the previous videos, and by default I'm not able to see anything as my new user. I haven't been permissioned to do anything in AWS whatsoever. So and because I'm operating under the root account, which somebody's kindly created a user for me inside, I'm not able to do anything, right? So that's DynamoDB. I can go to S3 and have a play around, and so I can't do anything. Now that's because by default, as I said, new users have no permissions. Let's actually see where we can actually sort of observe that behavior being configured, right? So let's go back to the users tab in our root account on the left hand side and go to our users. So we've looked at security credentials. Next thing we can do is we can actually assign policies, permissions to actually do something, right? So we're going to go into much more detail on policies later, but I just want to sort of illustrate the concept of assigning permissions to a user right now. So permissions are all managed via this thing called a policy in AWS, and so the idea is a policy defines essentially an action that you can do on a certain resource. So whether you're allowed or denied permissions to do certain action on certain resources. It doesn't include any information about which user or which group or which role, we will come to that later, it belongs to. It's a portable entity that you can attach to different users and groups and roles, right? So if I do attach policy, so just a quick intro to policies, I guess, while we're here. So Amazon comes with these different policies out of the box, pre-configured, and the great thing is that Amazon actually updates these as needs be. So for example, if we look at DynamoDB, if we search for DynamoDB, we can see that Amazon has actually created five DynamoDB policies out of the box for us to use and assign to our users and groups. If I look at this one, let's say full access, right? So what I'm saying is, if we click on this, okay, and we attach policy, so DynamoDB full access. So if we see down here, right, so DynamoDB full access is a policy that we've attached to the user Billy Bob, which now DynamoDB full access, as I said, is a policy that Amazon have essentially pre-configured and built themselves. Now, if the important point is that they maintain these permissions, so if part of accessing DynamoDB involves certain new operations, etc., that otherwise you would need to explicitly permission, Amazon update these on the fly, or well, not on the fly, but they update them at their end so that you don't have to do anything, right? And so as long as you have said that you want this DynamoDB user to have full access, that user will have full access no matter what happens to the sort of permissioning structure of DynamoDB under the hood. So if I just click on this one, you can see, or if I show policy here, so this is quite interesting in the sense that it is it shows you the kind of anatomy of a policy, and I'll go much more in detail into this later on in this video or later videos. But it's a JSON document, if you're familiar with JSON from the previous videos or generally. So it's a sort of a structured form of text document that defines different sort of hierarchical key values to be represented. And we can see here the general structure of a policy. Just to give you a quick introduction, is the policy includes a version number, but it also includes a list of one or more statements, and the statements essentially define the criteria that are applied that define what this policy enables a user to do or not do. So for example, this policy only has one statement, and the statement is that for all of the following actions, so it lists a bunch of actions, the effect is to allow, and the resource is basically defining what resources we can perform these actions on, right? So there's no mention in here of users, groups, or roles that this policy is destined to be attached to. It's portable, right? What it says is allow the following actions to be performed on these resources, and here we've got a wildcard, which means that we are it's basically star, right? So it means we can do everything. We can do, and if you see, so DynamoDB full access or is basically says action DynamoDB : star. Now, so if you look at the anatomy of these individual actions, okay, the first part of the action, left of the colon, defines the actual Amazon service that it applies to. So in this case, we're talking about DynamoDB, and then the second part, after the colon, defines the actual service that we're describing. So in this case, we're saying any service within the DynamoDB sort of service space, we are including in this list, and we are saying allow anybody who has this policy to perform these actions on all the resources, right? Now, I think in the previous videos, the first one on DynamoDB, I actually showed you a sample policy where we actually went into a bit more detail on the resources. Because here, if you wanted to permission certain tables in DynamoDB, you would actually go more granular in the resource section, okay? But anyway, so that's that. So we've attached this policy to our Billy Bob user, and so now, if I refresh the page, I can now see. I had to basically just refresh, but I didn't have to log out or log back in again. You can see now that I now have full permissions in DynamoDB, right, as my Billy Bob user. I can create a table, right? I can just basically knock myself out and do whatever I want, right? So create, okay, better put a partition key, and there you go. So it's creating my table, and we're good. Now, so what I want to do is just basically, just by playing around with this policy, I want to sort of show you the difference between users, groups, and roles. So I think what I'm going to do next is to I'm going to create another user, right? So I'm just going to go back to my IAM console, and I'm going to create another user, right, called Angelina. Okay, close that. Don't want the security credentials again. And for Angelina, I'm going to set security credentials and set a password again. And I'm going to assign a custom password again. And apply. So that's now done. So now I'm going to log in as Angelina. And we'll see now that Angelina has not been assigned any permissions for anything yet, right? So it was only Billy Bob that I assigned the DynamoDB thing to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, well, actually, do you know what? I don't want to have to. I want all the users I create to have access to DynamoDB, right? I'm building a database team. The whole point of Billy Bob and Angelina is that they have full access to DynamoDB. I don't want to have to assign DynamoDB to every single user I create. Okay, so the most logical thing for me to do over here, while this is busy failing over there, is go to groups. So a group is I may as well just delete this group. So a group is a sort of a logical group of users to which you can assign certain permissions and properties. Right. So if I create new group and say, okay, my DB team, which I've hired 2 expert DBAs. So now I can say, right, attach a policy. So let's go for the same policy that we had before, right? So I'm going to say attach the DynamoDB full access policy to my group. Okay. I can add many more policies if I want, but for now I'm only interested in DynamoDB, and that's it, right? So now I have a group which has we can browse that, we can see, okay, so we don't have any users. We'll come back to that in a second. Permissions, we have one policy attached to this group, and that defines that any user who's a member of this group has basically can do or not do the permissions defined by this policy. Okay, so if I go to users and I'm going to add users to group, right, and I'm going to add Angelina and Billy Bob to my group. Okay, so now you can add, you can remove users from group. That's the same. So now I've got 2 users in the group. If I actually go back to my Angelina screen over on the right and hit refresh, so now I can see Angelina has full access to DynamoDB. Okay, let's just call that ID, and great. So Angelina has a Angelina table, Billy Bob has his Billy Bob table, and everyone's happy. Okay, so as long as I keep creating new users and adding to them as group, they'll automatically have permissions to access DynamoDB. Right now, roles. So roles are something slightly different to groups. they're sort of capable of defining a sort of a similar behavior, I guess. So the point about roles is a role is an entity that you define in AWS, just like a group, which allows certain users to temporarily adopt that role, perform actions that are defined, that sort of a part of that role, right? That define what that role should and should not be able to do, and then once they're done, just to sort of step out of that role and back to their normal everyday life, right? So and so the idea is that when you log in as your normal user, as long as you're permissioned, you can actually assume a role temporarily. As soon as your browser session or whatever your session expires, you're no longer assigned to that role. You're no longer assuming that role or operating as that role. Okay, so let's have a quick look into that. So let's see. So at the moment I don't have any roles defined, but let's see how we create a new role and how we can use that to also allow the users that we create to operate in AWS in a way that we want them to. So if I do in roles, create new role, right? And I'm going to create a role. So I've got my DBA team group, right? But let's say I want to create a role which is database master guru, right? And this is basically this is a sort of the idea is that this is a role that the different users may or may not be allowed to assume at various times during their sort of career or their daily operations. But I'm going to say that anybody who's operating as this role is going to be able to do some pretty crazy, super privileged things, right? So next here. Now there are three different types of roles that you create. Now, so one thing to mention, and I'll definitely go into this in more depth in subsequent videos, is roles are really the way to go when you want to, let's say, if you have like an EC2 instance, an application running in EC2, which you want to be able to call other web services in your Amazon account. So let's say you have an EC2 hosted application that needs to connect to DynamoDB. So obviously, the ways you could do that would be to create a user, and then somehow embed that user in your kind of application logic and your application config in EC2, and then obviously the public and private keys that we showed before would have to be embedded in that config, and that's not actually the best way to do it. They recommend that you actually define a role which says, this role can do X, Y, Z in DynamoDB, and I'm going to allocate permissions to my EC2 instance to assume that role, and then that EC2 application can then go and do those things, right? So I'll go into more detail with an example of that later on. But just to give you an idea, these are all the service roles. So Amazon says, for example, as I mentioned, EC2. So this allows EC2 instances to call AWS services on your behalf. So this will be your EC2 application. You're going to define a role that allows the EC2 instance to assume that role and do things on your behalf. We're not going to do that right now. We're just going to keep it simple. I'm going to just do the role for cross account access, right? So what we're going to do is actually this role is going to be within our account. But the other really interesting thing about roles is that you can actually say, users from a different AWS account, right? So a completely different account number. If you see over here, so this is my account number here, and Angelina and Bob are both within my account. But what you can say is users from a totally different AWS account can temporarily assume a role within your account and perform operations on your resources, right? So I'm going to select the top one, provide access between AWS accounts that you own, right? So select this, and I'm going to enter my account number in here. And I'm not going to require multi-factor authentication here, just to keep it simple, right? And let's say I'm going to, again, the same old policy, right? So let's keep it simple to what we know. And Amazon DynamoDB full access, right? So I'm going to assign that policy to that role, okay? And that is really that. So now I've got a role and says anybody who assumes that role can actually can do full database privileges on DynamoDB, right? So a couple of things to mention here. Trusted entity. So when we go and look at the role config that we create, it's going to say what entities from outside my account do I trust to assume this role, okay? In this case, I've said, so I own this role, I define what the role can do and cannot do, and I specify at the time I create the role who I am trusting to assume that role, right? And in this case, I've just said, and you can do all sorts of things with this. You can set it up to sort of, federated users outside AWS. For now, I've just said it's, within my own account. Here's the policy that I've assigned. It's Amazon DynamoDB. And then give this link to users who can switch to roles in the console, right? So this is the URL that people will use when they want to log in and assume that role, right? So I'm just going to hit create. So now we have our role, right, in the roles tab. So again, just like the users and the groups, we can sort of browse through different tabs. Trust relationships I mentioned there. So again, we can say edit trust relationship, and we'll see the policy document there. So the policy document, which is the trust relationship, again, which defines who from outside my root account am I saying is permissioned to assume this role. And I say, well, so the effect is allow the principal, i.e. we're saying in this case who. So this is not a policy. So policies don't have any principal in them. But the trust relationship says this principal, so this identity, which is basically defined by anybody who's coming from inside this account, can perform the action assume role, right? Assume that role. So if we go back into here, so that's the trust relationship, really, really important. Now what we'll see is that what we also have to do is we have to set up users, the individual users also from the other side, permissions to assign the role. So it's kind of like a two-way process. I, as the owner of the role, have to say who I'm trusting to assume it, but also the people who manage those users, in that case that's also me, they also have to be permissioned from their side to assume the role. And I'll show you exactly what that means, okay? So, for example, so now we've got this link, right? We're going to copy this link to users to switch roles, right, into this role. So back over here, we are logged in as Angelina, okay? And so there's a link here, so you can do it from within the logged in session. You just do switch role, okay? So switch role, and I'm going to, so you specify which account, because again, remember, you can actually, roles enable you to actually adopt roles within other accounts, right? But we're doing it all within the same account. This was the name of the role, right? And then by default, the display name is going to show that you're logged in as database master guru at, and then the account number, right? And then you can put a color, which is optional. Now, so remember I said it was a two-way permissioning process. So I, as the role owner, have said anybody from basically coming in from this account has permission to assume this role. But there's another side of it which says whoever administers the users who are going to assume the role also have to assign permission on their end. So if I just hit this right now, I say, or it says, could not switch roles using the provided information, blah, 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 blah. So basically, it's an access denied. Okay. So what I need to do is the following. So to make this work, we have to actually permission Angelina explicitly or implicitly via a group or whatever to assume this role, right? So I'm going to basically go back to the users tab, right? I'm going to find Angelina. I'm going to say, okay, for now, Angelina is going to be the only person who can access DynamoDB. So actually, for that matter, while we're here, let's take Billy Bob and remove his DynamoDB full access, right? And I'm also going to remove the DynamoDB full access from the DBA team as well, right? So I'm going to go to this group, and I'm going to detach the policy from the group. So now, being a member of the DBA team no longer entitles you to DynamoDB either, right? So I'm just going to show you how this works in terms of the role rather than the group. Okay, so back to users. So now Billy Bob has absolutely no access to DynamoDB whatsoever, and neither does Angelina. So she has lost. She's a member of the DBA team, but they don't have any permissions. She has no permissions. Now I'm going to quickly. So what we're going to do is we're going to assign Angelina the permissions to adopt the DBA guru role, right? So in Amazon, I'm going to go into more detail probably in a separate video now because this is going on a bit longer. We're going to have managed policies or inline policies. So inline policies are policies that you create which are directly attached to the entity that you're currently working with, right? So if I create, which I will do now, just to illustrate, if I create, so my current user is Angelina. If I create a inline policy, that means that policy is literally bolted onto Angelina, the user, and I can't share it with any other users or groups or roles. That policy lives with Angelina, and if I delete the Angelina user, I delete the policy as well, right? So, these are sort of useful when you have a specific policy that you only ever want to apply to one particular entity, one user or whatever. Generally speaking, I think it's recommended that you use managed policies. Managed policy, when you create a managed policy, it becomes an entity in its own right in the system. So you can attach that managed policy to any user you want, any group you want, or any role you want, right? But I'm just going to demonstrate the inline policies here. So we can do policy generator, or we can just do custom policy. I'll go into that more in detail in the policy video. So select that. So we'll give it a policy name. Let's say it's DBA Guru policy. And the policy document, again, it's that. It's that JSON string. So here's one made earlier, Blue Peter style. So basically, you put your JSON, which defines the policy in here. And so all you have to do is basically make sure that you substitute the correct details into this JSON, right? So if I just copy these values back in, sorry, I'm just being a bit slow here. So there's the account ID, and then the role. So we're going to substitute our actual role name in here, like this. We're going to validate policy. So validate policy makes sure that your JSON document is well formatted and that all the tags are correctly assembled, and apply policy. So great. So now what we see, our user Angelina has this policy attached to her, right? And so we can show policy, we can edit, we can remove to detach. If we remove an inline policy, once again, because it's inline and attached to the user, it just vanishes from the system, right? It doesn't exist outside Angelina. So let's actually see if this works. So now I'm going to go back to here. So I'm still logged in as Angelina, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my switch role, and I'm going to hit the account, and I'm going to hit the role is I need to show policy. That was the name of the role. There you go. And then again, I'm happy to just use the I can just do Angelina there if you want. Actually, let's leave it blank so you can see. So this is the default display name. I'm going to hit switch role now. And there you have it. So now, if you look at the top right of the screen, we are now operating within the AWS session as the database master guru role, right? If we hit this button here, we can see, okay, we are logged in as Angelina. We are currently active as database master guru. And if I can hit back to Angelina here, and that will basically take me out of that role, and then I will no longer be able to do the things that role can do. So if I go to DynamoDB here, you'll see, because I've assumed my database guru role, I can create my tables, right? Angelina guru table. I can do all this great stuff. Okay? So I've created my table because I'm operating this role. But if I then go, okay, do you know what? I'm tired of being database guru. I'm going back to being everyday Angelina. Back to Angelina. Now you'll see at the top right hand side of the screen, not authorized, right? We're back to being plain old Angelina and we can't do anything, right? So, and don't forget now, so Bob has no privileges either to access DynamoDB anymore, right? Billy Bob. So if we sign out, so if we sign back in as Bob, Billy Bob, like this. So because we removed Bob's DBA privileges from the group, right? We can no longer see DynamoDB, right? Not authorized. But what we're going to do now is say, right, just to hammer home how the users, groups, and roles fit together, we're going to say, instead of assigning permission to Angelina to assume the DBA guru policy, we're going to say anybody within the DBA team has permission to temporarily assume the DBA guru role, right? So, and this will actually what we can do is we can go to users, Angelina, show the policy, DBA guru policy, right? I'm just going to copy this, right? Then I'm going to go to groups. So our groups, DBA team groups. So inline policies can be applied to users and groups. And I'm going to actually just do exactly the same, but for the DBA team, right? So I'm going to say group, assume guru is the policy name. I'm going to validate policy. Policy is valid. Great. Okay. So now the group, so anybody who belongs to this group, my DB team, has the privileges to assume the DBA guru role, right? So now, if I basically come out of here, right? So I'm now Billy Bob. Now I did not assign the permission explicitly to Billy Bob's user. I assigned it to the group, the permission to assume the role. So if I can do now switch role, and I'm going to say, right, so I am going to stick in this account and I am going to assume this role as, so I'm Billy Bob, but I'm going to assume this role, give it a nice color, switch role. And now you can see I'm logged in as database master guru, right? If I hit down, so we're logged in as Billy Bob. We are currently active as this role. This is the account, and I can go to DynamoDB, and I can create my Billy Bob guru table. Right, so now I've got my Angelina table, Angelina Guru table, so all these tables are there, and just to hammer the point home, if I go back to Billy Bob, so if I say, okay, I'm tired of being Billy Bob, I'm going to go back to Billy Bob. So tired of being the guru, I'm going to go back to being my normal self. I'm no longer permission to do anything in DynamoDB, right? So that gives you a kind of an idea about how to sort of set up roles. The fact that it's a two-stage permissioning process. Also sort of how users and groups and roles kind of tie in with each other. We talked a bit about inline policies. We talked briefly about managed policies, as in so managed policies being policies that Amazon create for you out of the box, but also you can actually create your own managed policies, right? So, but the managed policy being a policy that is a sort of separate entity and that can be attached at will to any user, group, or role. So, long video. Thank you for watching. In the next one, we're going to sort of delve into much more detail about the actual structure of the policies themselves, because it's quite fiddly, but it's very powerful. You can do all sorts of things. We're probably going to focus it on the kind of S3 product, which is obviously the document or the object store or the online storage. So yeah, thanks again for watching. Any questions, please leave them down below. And yeah, see you in the next one. Bye.